The Mayo Clinic did a survey on holiday stress a few years ago. And they discovered that 69% of the people surveyed were stressed because they were concerned about not having enough money. 51 were stressed because they felt pressured to give gifts, and that just was stressful. And 69% were stressed because they didn't feel they had enough time. Unfortunately, this holiday season brings out stress. And some of that is the busyness of everything going on. So I want to poll the audience, quick show of hands. How many of you plan on attending at least one holiday party this month? Just a couple of you.
We make our own.
You make it. Okay. How many of you are hosting a holiday party this month? Anybody?
No.
I didn't know he was.
Okay. Milo is. He just doesn't know it yet. So we can go there next Tuesday. Who still has Christmas shopping to do? Who still has Christmas decorating to do? Who is planning on traveling over the holidays? Yeah. All these different things that we've got to fit in, right? Busy. It's the most busiest time of the year. I know the song goes, it's the most wonderful time of the year, but we might as well put busiest in there. Because we take a normally busy schedule for many people, and then we just cram more stuff into it. Like taking 50 pounds of potatoes and shoving them into a 10-pound sack. It gets a little snug and a little uncomfortable. Kind of like those clothes after 6 weeks of holiday eating, right? We have this time that is busy. At the same time, we're not the first people that have struggled with busyness. As we look at our readings from tonight, we bump into two people who are just a little busy. As we catch up with Moses here in Exodus 18, verse 13, the next day Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening. Moses was sitting on the judgment seat, being the one-man Supreme Court, from sun up to sundown, probably 6 days a week. It is crazy. Yeah. And then we bump into Mary. Mary has this angel appear. Greetings, O highly favored one. The Lord is with you. What is Mary's response? She's terrified. The Lord is with you. God is with you should not bring a terrified response, should it? Now, it could be that the angel was a bit off-putting. I know we make them look like these little cute cherubs in our culture today. I don't think they look that cute. Angels are warriors, and I'm guessing they're a little bit fierce-looking. So that might have been part of the challenge. But remember, Mary is planning a wedding here. And what bride wants Christmas to be thrown into the middle of her wedding plans? Or an unexpected pregnancy. Realizing that especially in that culture, first comes marriage, then comes the baby and the baby carriage, and love might be in there someplace, because all these marriages were arranged in those days. And so Mary's saying, wait a minute, I'm getting married, I'm already pregnant, this is going to be challenging. This is going to be tough. Because all of a sudden life is going to get busier. Busy. We seem to be addicted to busy in our culture. It's kind of a badge of honor. You know, the response, the second most popular response I get when I ask people, hey, how you doing? First one is fine. You know, freaked out, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. Right? That's what that really means. It also means I can tell you anything and you wouldn't hear it anyway. And that's just our own listening skills in our culture today. But the number two answer I typically get is busy. And many times people will say to me, oh, I'm sure you're busy, right? Because if you're not busy, you're just a slacker. If you're not busy, what are you doing with your time? You're just sitting on the couch eating bonbons, watching soap operas. And you all that are retired, busier than when you were working. Because I've heard the comment, if my schedule was like this when I was working, I don't know how I would fit work in. Because you got all this stuff, right? All this stuff that's on the calendar. As I look at busy, I kind of put it into two different categories. There's good busy and there's bad busy. Good busy is the productive busy. The busy that is efficient, effective, gets something done, and there's an end date on that busy, right? Have a project, have a deadline, get it done, move on. Bad busy is when all of a sudden you're no longer in charge of your own schedule. All of a sudden, it's like you're on a treadmill and jogging along, and somebody has a remote control hooked up to that treadmill, and they double the rate of speed, and then they double it again, and then they double it again, and you're hanging on to life for dear life, you know, not sure if you're going to be able to keep up, not sure if you can keep anything straight in your head, on your schedule, and you're frantically going from place to place, losing sleep, and it's just not going well. That's bad busy. As I look at this reading that we have from Exodus, Moses has bad busy. Moses thinks he's a little bit indispensable, right? As his father-in-law comes up, now this could be a father-in-law, son-in-law issue as well, because there could be some frustrations with family, and those get exasperated this time of year, and we'll get into frustrations a couple weeks down the road. But Moses and Jethro have a little bit of a tense interchange here. Jethro, his father-in-law, verse 14, saw all that Moses was doing for the people, and he said, "What is this you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge while all these people stand around from morning till evening?" Moses answered, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will." Duh, right? Gets a little defensive. Well, what are you doing all this for? Well, why do you think I'm doing all this? Because who else is going to do this? I've got to get all this stuff done, right? And how often have we put ourselves in that spot? Because busy isn't always an external thing coming in. Busy sometimes is us not being able to say no, or not wanting to say no. Because there's some pride in us, you know. Boy, you know, that vacation, that outing, it really couldn't happen without me, could it? That church, that business would just fall apart if I wasn't in the middle of it. And we say things like that. And we actually, in our own minds, think that they make sense. And then we walk away, and then we realize that life can go on without us, which is also a little unsettling at times. We like to be indispensable. We like to be needed. And I think Moses liked to be needed. You know, there's that phrase, if you want something done right, then do it yourself. Now, to give a glimpse of what Moses might have been dealing with, well, right now, Israel is one of the most litigious countries in the world. They have 96.8 lawsuits for every 1,000 people that are there in a year. That's a lot of lawsuits. Attorneys, it's a great place to go if you want to practice law, because you're going to get a lot of practice. Okay? Now, I don't know if the Israelites were that cranky, but I don't know about you. When I think of the Exodus, I have a hard time computing the number of people that are there. You know, many times we think of it like a big church camp-out type thing. Well, there were 2 million people that went through the Exodus, that crossed from slavery and were making their way to the Promised Land. And if those Israelites are like the people who live in Israel today, that would mean Moses was hearing 530 cases per day. Probably not that many, but he was a busy guy with probably a pretty big backlog. And yet he needed to be the one to do that. When I first became a pastor, I bumped into a similar issue. Part of it was the congregational system I stepped into, and part of it was me. Graduated seminary, and the seminary process is beautiful. You get 2 years in the classroom where you dabble in some work in congregations and different ministries. And then you get to go out on an internship. And you get to function like a pastor for a year. And then they stick you back in the classroom for another year. I understand why they do this. But it gives me a bit of a sense for what people like who have been out on parole and have had their parole pulled. Because it's like, oh, back in the classroom again, okay. And so you're chomping at the bit when you get out. And I took a call as an associate pastor to a moderately large congregation. And I was just ready to go. Ready to go, ready to go, ready to be the pastor that I knew God wanted me to be. And my job description included youth ministry, and we had a senior high group that met every Sunday night. We had a junior high group that met 2 Sunday afternoons a month, and a preteen group that met 1 Sunday afternoon a month. I also got to oversee singles ministry, fellowship ministry, older adult ministry. I was also the pastor who did the weddings, and we had a beautiful worship space, and we didn't charge for weddings. This was an outreach to the community. So we didn't charge for facility, we didn't charge for me. I did 6 sessions with every couple that I met with. And before I left there, my last 6 weeks there, I did 8 weddings. I was also the funeral pastor. And there was one January, we had 4 funerals in that month. Thankfully, the senior pastor pitched in and picked up 2 of them for me. And in Kansas, when you have a funeral, you have the funeral the day of, and then you have also sometimes a prayer service the night before, and sometimes also tied with that prayer service or the night before, you have a visitation at the funeral home, and the pastor's expected to be with those things for the whole time. I was also the pastor that visited people in the hospital. And when I got into ministry at the end of the last century, well, people stayed in the hospitals longer. And remember 20 years ago, a week hospital stay, that was not unheard of. And the congregation really valued caregiving. This actually came out, we did a study on determining our values. I remember sitting in this meeting going, okay, this should have been problematic when I showed up here. We had a member that voiced, we value caregiving so much that we pay a pastor to do it for us. The expectation on hospital calls, Leavenworth is 45 minutes from Kansas City, about 45 minutes from St. Joe, about 45 minutes from Topeka. If anybody was in the hospital in Leavenworth or any of those communities, the expectation was their pastor would visit them daily. I learned how to write sermons on my windshield. It didn't take too long before all of a sudden morning came and I couldn't get out of bed. And this kept on going and I was dragging. And so I checked myself in for therapy. And the therapist said, you're burned out. You're doing too much. You're depressed. And I got some medicine. And what I should have done is say, okay, I have this medicine. I need to modify my schedule. This medicine will help me feel better. And I need to get in a sane schedule that's not so busy. But for me, and I thought this for probably about 15 years, well, this medicine just allows me to function like I like to function, which is over-functioning. And so I continue to push the envelope with my body. I think about a year or 2 after that, Lent was going on, and I had a couple of members come up to me and they said, you need to slow down. You need to slow down. I said, it's Lent. Easter's coming, I'll take a break after Easter. No, you need to slow down. Well, all of a sudden I got a pain in my knee. And then the knee swelled up. I figured, well, I'll just get crutches. I preached on crutches, led worship on crutches, did youth ministry on crutches. I got chewed out for that one, and rightly so, because we had other people in the congregation who could do those things. I just was like Moses, going, no, this is what I do, right? Finally, the doctor said, you know what, let's do it. We'll take some fluid off it, test that, we'll scan it. You need to take 3 days, get the thing up, stay home. 3 days swung, and they gave you medication. I said, well, you must have guessed right, the medication worked, because my knee's fine now. And they said, test results turned up nothing. Nothing wrong with your knee. Well, oh, really? songs between my ears here because I felt that I needed to do those things. But I don't think I'm alone. We fall into those traps where we're like Moses and we say, no, I have to do this. This is what I do, right? And we want to be that indispensable person. And some of that is, I think we want to be God. Because only God can do all those things. But even God modeled a day of rest for us. After he was done creating, he rested. Not because he was tired, but I think to set an example for us. And so there are those times where we overschedule things. And I think we overvalue certain things. There are other times that things come in our schedule, they pop up, and we've got to make room for them. But Christmas is one of those times. So I want you in your mind, fill in the blank on this. It wouldn't be Christmas without blank. It wouldn't be Christmas without blank. Now, if you put Jesus in that blank, you're cheating because you're in a worship gathering, okay? You're right, it wouldn't be Christmas without Jesus. That's the only answer that you can skate on this. But we put other stuff in there typically, right? We need the decorations, or we need the music, or we need this gathering, or we need this special cookie that always takes way too much work and dirties way too many dishes. I'm the dishwasher in my house. I like the cookies, but I like the scoop and bake ones because I don't have to wash as many dishes. All these things. And Christmas decorating is a big one for us. And we've wrestled with this at times over the years, and this is at least the second time, maybe the third, that we have intentionally scaled back our decorations. Now, if you're connected with Stacy or me on Facebook and you've seen the pictures of our decorations, you're going scaled back. Yes, this is scaled back, okay? We've got so much Christmas stuff that Mrs. Claus would be jealous, okay? We have, at one point, had 3 trees, a 9-footer, a 6.5-footer, and a 5-footer, and enough stuff to cover every inch of a home, all the rooms. Okay, this year we put up 1 tree. It is 9 feet tall, but 1 tree. And all of the decorations are on the main floor, and I will do some lights outside, in part because all my neighbors have their lights up, and I'm feeling like a slacker. So I will squeeze in a time when it's not too cold and not too windy, which today would have been a great day, but I didn't squeeze it in to do that. But we all have those things this time of year that can overshadow that answer that you can't skate on. Can overshadow Jesus. All sorts of things that can crowd our schedules to squeeze Jesus out of Christmas. And many times we substitute these other things for Jesus. Now, many times they help enhance our celebration, but they can't replace Jesus. And so as Jethro was having this interchange with Moses, he makes a very interesting suggestion to him. Verse 17, what you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy. In the beginning of verse 19, listen now to me and I will give you some advice. That's what every son-in-law likes to hear, right? Listen now and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them the decrees and laws. Show them the way to live and the duties they are to perform, but select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, 50s, and 10s. If you've ever done Amway, you know that model. It's where they got it. Basically, Jethro is saying, Moses, use your resources. God has given you godly men who can work with you to manage and lead these people. It is not all on you. And that's the same message that God tells us. It's not all on you. Whether it's December, January, February, the middle of July, it's not all on you. Because our God generously gives us everything that we need. He generously gives each one of us 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, 52 weeks in a year. He equally distributes time. Some of us would like to add an 8th day now and there, maybe a 13th month some years. But we all get the same amount of time. God also gives us our treasures, and those vary, right? Some of us have more, some of us have less, and that's just the way things have worked out as God has guided our lives and as we followed God's lead, and sometimes not followed His lead. God gives us friends and family. So there are times in the midst of busyness we need to step back and say, what can I do differently? First, one, is everything that I'm busy doing right now needful? Is it helpful? Does it help me in my relationship with God? Does it help me love my neighbor as myself? And then the other thing is, what resources has God given me? There are times where God has blessed us, and we say, you know what? I'm going to support the economy. I'm going to help somebody else make a livelihood, and I'm going to pay them to do some of these things. And there are times where it is good, right, and salutary to do that. Some of it pains us to do that. Because we're like, well, no, they aren't going to do it as good as I will. They're not going to do it the same as I will. You know, or what if they do it better than I will? That's the worst fear, right? But sometimes we need to do that. And we need to support somebody else's enterprise and take some of that stress and busyness off our plate. And sometimes we need to reach out to a friend or reach out to a family member and say, hey, I could use some help with. And those words are hard to say sometimes, aren't they? Because if we have to reach out for help, well, that's because we can't do it ourselves. We can't get it done. But yet God has placed those people in our lives. And sometimes those are the people who well-meaningly say, hey, if you need anything, give me a call. And sometimes you call them and they say, oh, I didn't think you would. But anyway, but sometimes they're ready to step in and help. We need to use the resources that God has given us. We need to be good stewards of everything that God has. And that includes our own health, physical health, mental health, spiritual health. And especially this season in the midst of the busyness, to focus on that good news. Mary, who was terrified of the angel, received some phenomenal news. She received that good news that she would bear a son, and his kingdom would never end. You talk about an abundant gift of time, eternity, and that is ours through Jesus. It's not a gift we have to earn, not a gift that we have to do something to deserve. There is no performance requirement. You have to, get this many merit badges. You have to check this many boxes off on the list. You have to do this many steps. God doesn't work that way. We live in a world that does, which is where we get trapped in being too busy and basing our worth on what we can and cannot do. But God bases our worth on we are His people. He has made us. He sent His Son Jesus to save us. And by His grace we are saved, not from works so that no one can boast. Because we are God's masterpieces, created in Christ Jesus for the good works that can be our way of life. Again, God's not adding stuff into our schedule with that. He's saying, as you go along and live life, you get to do these things. They're all a gift. And so in the midst of the madness of this season, the challenge for us is to continue to keep ourselves focused on the reason for this season. Jesus, the Word who became flesh and lived as one of us, died in our place and rose again, so that we can have the abundance of all abundance as sons and daughters of the Creator of the universe. Amen.